Thank you, Lasciam Corlin. Since I came into office, we've debated the issues of migration, of immigration, of international protection and the war in Ukraine extensively in this chamber, and we've done it through statements, through oral questions, through leaders' questions, and those debates, they've been robust, they've been informative. And look, this is absolutely appropriate. We're in the midst of the largest humanitarian exercise, the largest humanitarian response we've ever had to make as a state in terms of meeting the needs of 100,000 people who fled to this country over the last year, fleeing the war in Ukraine, fleeing conflict elsewhere in the world through the international protection process. And I think we can have conversations about migration, about immigration, and we can debate it and we can hold different views. And equally, the government has an important role in terms of providing accurate, factual, timely information to public representatives. And I've spoken with many reps here, as has my colleague Minister Joe O'Brien, and met with businesses, met with councillors, met with constituents. We have, as you know, a dedicated community engagement team, and I know many of you have spoken with them about accommodation that's being used in your constituencies, and that's helped you allay issues, allay concerns that have been raised. I think it's really important that we make it clear the international protection process is a rules-based process. International protection means fairly and humanely in examining a person's application for international protection, sheltering and supporting people while their application is being processed, and giving people the right to stay here where that right to stay is needed. And where it is found that they don't have a basis for the claim, they won't be allowed to stay in this country. And where someone is claiming international protection, they must do so at the International Protection Office. When a person enters the process, they're fingerprinted, they're photographed. Those fingerprints are checked against the Eurodac and an EU immigration database, which stores the fingerprints of asylum applicants and those who've crossed borders illegally. And character and conduct checks are undertaken by An Garda Síochána at the point where consideration has been given to someone being granted refugee status or other permissions to remain in the state. And again, in terms of the facts, while someone is being accommodated in the state, they are provided with accommodation alongside with a payment of €38.80 a week per adult. And people are entitled to seek work here in the state after a 6-month period. So these are the facts, and it's important when we're speaking in this chamber, we speak about the facts, and it's important that we as public representatives talk accurately about the facts. And we can debate the issues around that, and we can debate the policies, and that's part of a normal functioning democracy, and that's the role we as public representatives need to play. However, what has happened in some parts of the country over the past number of years is the very antithesis of the democratic process. The arson attacks that we've seen, they are deeply sinister. They're designed to intimidate and they're designed to threaten the normal functioning of government and the normal functioning of this state. And make no mistake about it, this is violent extremism, and it's been drip-fed by a feed of disinformation, a feed of misinformation, with the result that people, that homes and communities are being actively put at risk. And not only has accommodation earmarked for international protection applicants been burnt down, but so has accommodation earmarked for Irish people who are homeless, and indeed buildings that have no connection with the state whatsoever. And even in cases where my department has publicly confirmed that a particular building isn't going to be used by us, attacks are still being carried out. So the people who are taking these actions, they claim to be patriots. They wave our flags, yet they're literally burning down parts of our country, parts of the country that they claim to love. And they are putting at risk the communities that they claim to be protecting. And violence and the threat of it, the destruction of property, the risk to life, these are people who care nothing about communities in this country. They don't care about the truth, they only care about advancing a very narrow and dangerous ideology, whatever the cost. And we have to be very clear about the real-world impacts of these crimes. Right now, we are facing a serious accommodation crisis for those seeking international protection. As of today, around 1,000 people have not been offered accommodation, and the situation is steadily becoming more challenging, and we're facing into similar shortages in accommodation for women and children. And the effects of these arson attacks is to deny or delay accommodation to those who need it, leaving vulnerable people in a more vulnerable position. And the attacks also place at risk people living in the buildings. They place at risk local communities, with fires threatening to spread to adjoining buildings, and they put at risk the emergency services. And I want to welcome the ongoing investigations by the Gardaí into recent arson attacks. And I'd urge anyone who has information about these crimes to contact the Gardaí. And it is absolutely vital that those who are committing these crimes learn that there are consequences to them. Within my own department, we seek to support accommodation providers in relation to their own security. Accommodation providers are aware of their obligations in relation to providing security at centres, and at occasions of heightened risk, the department has actually supported individual accommodation locations to bring on additional security. We have a 24/7 emergency phone line for accommodation providers and public bodies for advice and action outside of normal office hours. Each accommodation centre is designated a liaison Garda inspector, and they serve as a direct contact in terms of if an issue of concern arises. And I really want to thank An Garda Síochána for the support that they provide to individual centres. As we continue to respond to a very severe accommodation crisis faced by the state, we continue to liaise closely with accommodation providers, with An Garda Síochána, in order to provide safety and security for international protection applicants and for local communities. And while undoubtedly these attacks grab headlines over the last number of years in particular, and in recent months in particular, we have also seen at that same time a quiet welcome being extended by communities all over this country to people who arrive seeking shelter from the war in Ukraine, seeking shelter from other conflicts. And I believe it is these communities that represent the very best of Irish values in terms of empathy, solidarity, and an understanding of our history and an understanding of what it means to be marginalised. So again, as I do at all these discussions, I want to thank the deputies for their ongoing engagement with me, particularly when people are being accommodated within their own communities. And I want to recognise the huge work that community groups have done around the country in terms of welcoming new arrivals into their community, making them feel welcome, making them feel safe, and making them feel secure. Thank you, Laskin.